What's going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with a little tiny swim jig today. This is an 1/8 ounce Berkley swim jig head. I can't remember exactly what number or whatever. This is a really big hook. This is probably a 3/0, at least a 3/0 hook. It's really thick and sturdy too. I was surprised at how big the hook was compared to the jig head, but I really like it. And so I was kind of going for like a streamer-ish pattern. So the tail of this bait is just a few flat wing saddle feathers. This is pastel orange and pastel chartreuse from Hairline. These are a great deal. I got these at Spawn Fly Fish. They're 30 bucks each, and I will have these saddles. I can't even tell you how long I'm going to have these for. So it's a little bit of an investment at first. I think I ordered these two and a pastel purple. And so, you know, you're spending 90 bucks. But again, I'll have these saddles for probably 4 years. So for 30 bucks, these are a great deal. The body of this is just standard chartreuse and orange bucktail. And then the head of this is just Senyos laser dub in fluorescent chartreuse and fluorescent orange. I got this one at Orvis, but Senyos laser dub is great. I put a really small amount on here because my goal was to keep this bait, the materials, as thin as the head itself, because I didn't want some big bulky body with a small head. So that was the goal. Let's tie it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my tailing material, and this bait is going to be probably around 4.5 inches, and so it's going to be definitely a smaller presentation. So everything I'm doing, I'm trying to, a bait like this, you've probably, if you've watched any of the muskie videos, if you haven't and you like muskie, watch them. But on like a muskie jig, I always add way more than what I'm even comfortable with. My gut is thinking this is going to be a monstrosity, and it's really hard on a big bait like that to have too much stuff on it. But this is going to kind of be the opposite. I really would rather have this bait be too thin than too big, because this is a really light head, and I don't want some huge body on this little head. I want these materials, when wet, to be about the size of this head. Maybe a little bit bigger. The dubbing head might be a little bit bigger, but that's the goal, is to make it a smaller streamer style kind of, you know, I'm thinking of throwing this in shallower water, letting it sink 3-4 feet and just pop, 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 pop. So I'm going to add these feathers in. I'm going to fast forward through it because it takes a while. I'm going to add these feathers in. We'll get our bucktail ready, and we'll keep moving up. Alright, feathers are down, glue's dry. I've got a super thin stack of just chartreuse. It might look more yellow in the camera, but the chartreuse must just be a really hard color to dye, because I swear, all of these chartreuse tails that I've got are all pretty different. White is white, black is black, and most of the time the other colors are pretty even. But chartreuse is just kind of tough. It must be. I don't know. I've never dyed a chartreuse tail. But I'm going to put this first really thin stack in. And I want it to go pretty far back to where my feathers are. And I'm going to put it right by where this bump comes up. And you can tell I had to file down a couple, a plastic keeper or something like that. I doubt it would be a skirt keeper, but I'm going to put that right here. Bring it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to, my fingers are stuck. I'm going to get this spun around again. This is like super thin. A super thin bit of bucktail. Just almost none. And there shouldn't be any flare in here. I don't want any flare on something like this because I'm putting down for my head, I'm putting down some Senyos laser dub, and so I don't need really any flare from this hair. And I'll just trim up the parts that are sticking. I'm going to actually end up tying that second bucktail really close to the head because this little bump, I don't want it sticking all of my materials up. So I'm going to trim as much of this off as I can. If I tie, I don't know if you can see, if I tie that bucktail right by this bump, it's going to flare up. So if I tie it way farther up here, it'll be less likely to be affected by that bump. But first I'm going to put a little bit of flash down. So the flash that I'm going to use is Montana Fly Company Kreelex, and it's funny how it says guaranteed to swim. I don't know what else it would do besides swim, but maybe, I don't know who thought about putting that on the package, but this stuff is great. It's spendy for flash, so you just gotta kind of mind what you're cutting off and what you're not going to use and stuff like that. But I've got a couple different Kreelexes. These are really, really nice. It's kind of like Polar Flash, I would say. Like Hedron Polar Flash or whoever makes it. Right out of Stillwater, actually. About half hour, 45 minutes from where I live. So I've got a couple little stacks of this. I'm not really going to make it too long. I'm just going to put a couple of these in. And again, it's like Polar Flash, so this stuff really likes to just knot up a little bit. So that's why I'm not putting a big mess of this on and spreading it around. I'm just really gonna kind of rotate my vise around and put it in that way because I don't want, this stuff is just gonna get tangled in my deer hair and it's gonna be hard to kind of rotate it around. So I'm just gonna kind of put it in and spread it out just a little bit, and that should be good. It's good stuff, but it's super limp, so it kind of just gets tangled up in your other stuff. So I'll just do 3 little stacks of this. That's going to be a lot of flash. 3 little stacks add up, you know. So definitely want to be careful. I'm not a huge flash guy, so, but all the other stuff that I put on will cover this up. So you'll just get a little bit of flash that comes through. Got a little bit I need to trim off there. Then I'm just going to work my way up. This is 210 red, by the way. I think this is Danvilles. Yeah. Danvilles, just 210. Flat wax nylon, not Flymaster Plus. So again, I have to be really careful about building up a really thick head here. I could switch to 140 denier, but I don't really feel like taking the time to do that. So every wrap I have to be really careful with. The last stack of hair I'm going to do is also super thin, because again, really this deer hair is just to add some body and color. I'm not trying to build my bait around this. My bait's really actually being built around the head, which is going to be Senyos laser dub. And so this is actually going to go back not quite as far as my other hair, but it's going to go relatively farther back. And I really don't have to worry about a super neat collar here. I usually am very concerned with the collar. You've seen in my other videos, I trim them. I trim every one pretty in decent detail, but this is going to get covered up anyway. And so I'm just spreading this stuff around just to get it around. And then you can see that it's getting pushed up. I'm not worried about that because when it gets wet, it'll come down. But that's what I meant when I was talking about that bump. I could have filed it down a little bit more, but it's always kind of a little game to play. It won't be detrimental to this jig, so it's just tricky getting the hair spread around evenly on these jig heads that it's kind of like 90 degrees, because that hair does not want to bend straight up like that. But again, I'm not worried at all about this being some, you know, beautiful little collar. I'm just going to trim this up and we'll get our Senyos down. Alright, so you can even see as I put some tighter wraps on that, that hair kind of went down a little, and you can kind of just run your fingers on it. That deer hair, it's really easy to kind of morph and do what you want. It listens pretty well. So I've got 2 stacks of Senyos laser dub, just orange and chartreuse or something like that. But these are both really light amounts, and I've got more next to me. I'm gonna put some on and I'm gonna get it wet, and if it's still a little thin, I can always add more. It's kind of like the measure twice, cut once. I can always come back and add more, but even this, I'm nervous about how much this is. So it's funny, I've been just playing with this and pulling out a little bit more and more, but I'm just gonna kind of stick with what I've got. And again, I can always just add more if it's too light. So I'm going to kind of cord up my thread. Again, I should have lighter thread on here. Even with this, I could probably get away with 70 denier. So I'm going to get that on about 50-50. And I'm just going to do one little loose wrap right by the head. And then kind of get that cinched down. And then I can kind of spread this out. And you can see it's really thin. But I want it, I want this bait to look nice, and I don't want it to be some giant bulky thing. So I'm going to get that around. And the good thing is, if I have any thin spots of this laser dub, it's going to blend in pretty well with the other stuff I've got. So I'll just get this stacked up. Get a little bit more out. And then I'm going to put this, which is what will be the top of my bait. Just watch out for my hook. Cord up my thread again. And just get one loose wrap right by the head. Get that wrapped down. Then I can just follow that other wrap. The Senyos can be kind of tricky to do really, really well. It's easy to put it on and wrap, but to do it well is a little bit harder. Not that I'm some ace, but I still kind of struggle with this stuff to make it perfect. So I'm going to get this folded back, and I'm just going to work my thread up. Get that bottom one pushed. Then I can fold all this back. Get that wrapped down. Then I can kind of comb this out. And then again, I'm going to get this bait wet. And I'm not going to add eyes or anything because that little jig head, I mean, those eyes are really small. I would almost take those eyes off and put maybe some 6mm. Those are probably 3. But we'll see. First things first is get this down. So I'm going to just get this wrapped off again. I don't want to put a ton of wraps down here because if I have to add more, I don't want that thread to go past where that jig, where that lead ends, because then it'll look kind of goofy. So I'm going to get this trimmed off. And And before I add any head cement or anything like that, you can kind of see it's going to be thin. So just pulling it back like this, you can kind of see that it's, I'm hoping, that it's not going to be too thick. When it absorbs water, it's not necessarily that thin, but we'll get this wet. We'll see how she looks. All right, so again, the goal was for this jig head to be as wide or tall or whatever you want to call it as the bait itself, and I think that's pretty darn close. I think this ended up turning out pretty well. This is dripping wet. I mean, the head might even have some water on it still. So it's not, you know, it doesn't necessarily look exactly like it's going to look in the water, or when it dries a little bit more. They usually, a bait like this looks a little bit better when it's a little bit more dry, but I don't have time to sit and let it dry for 2 hours. So a little chartreuse, shad pattern, jig, streamer, swim bait, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to swim it kind of like or fish it kind of like a swim bait. So a little over 4.5 inches, a little under 4.25. So it's a smaller bait, thin, a little bit long, but again, this is just supposed to imitate forage and stuff like that. So like and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment below. Appreciate all the support. Junior's Fishing Company. We'll see you on the next one.